pandemic has caused devastation around the world, but it's also slowed us down and in many ways brought us back to nature and back to one basic human need: food. This is the Farm It Forward team. They're a social enterprise based in the Blue Mountains, aiming to connect young people with an interest in growing food to landowners. Kevina, the lady in blue, owns this property, and today the team are installing a water irrigation system on the plot. Mano is the coordinator of Farm It Forward, and she says not only is her team growing food, they're growing community connection.
And one that is shorter down here. So you have the long 19mm side here. We actually really had a look at council data on the biggest issues in the Blue Mountains community. And one of the biggest issues is mental health issues due to social isolation. It's a problem that is particular to the Blue Mountains, but it is a hugely widespread phenomenon in all of the edges of town and also in suburban areas. Just because we're a bit closer to each other doesn't mean we have good community connection. So a lot of the time we have this, I like to call it, office cubicle way of living, where we just don't go beyond our fence boundaries. And you could feel incredibly isolated in the middle of people, just as much as out in a rural setting.
One thing you'll find growing on most Farm It Forward plots is kale. It's that leafy green or sometimes even purple vegetable that's been as trendy as avocado on toast. Beyond its health benefits, there could be a lot more behind this obsession.
We choose to spend our discretionary time and money in ways that help us fulfill our most basic human needs for control, for community, and for purpose.
And I reckon the strawberries and the asparagus.
It's great to have the water flowing into both sides, really.
And if you really take that lens and look at the biggest food and lifestyle trends that are going on right now, you can see those human needs showing up, or at least a desire to fulfill those human needs.
As advanced as our societies have become, we can't survive without food. And when times of crisis threaten this basic human need, people are called to action. It happened after World War II, and it's happening now.
At the start of the pandemic, a lot of people were starting to grow their own food out of a sense of fear. They wanted to be able to secure some calories for their family, or at least feel like they had the skill set in order to provide.
Victory Gardens were established due to disrupted food systems during World War II, and this pandemic has been no different. Nurseries around Australia reported seedling sales going through the roof. What's different these days, however, is that the sharing of gardening skills has happened online.
There's also another part of this, though, which is about community, right? A lot of this is happening in community gardens. Gathering outside is much safer than gathering indoors. It's an opportunity to talk to other people. And even if you're doing it in your own backyard, it's an opportunity to go online and say, hey, I'm growing okra or whatever it is you're growing in this particular area. Who has tips, right? And so much of online culture, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, was about supporting one another in this joined, kind of group growth process and learning process.
However, physical isolation has taken a toll. While in some cases we've seen the best of people, we've also seen panic buying and darker days for mental health.
Typically what we do see in times of food shortage, where food is not able to come to, say, the supermarkets and people are raiding supermarket shelves, we see extreme spikes in anxiety.
But the fire hasn't gone out at Atesh, a restaurant in the Blue Mountains which transformed into a bakehouse during the lockdown. Using local produce, Atesh has brought wood-fired focaccia and baked goods to locals during some of these lonelier days.
We've got a nice cheesecake, semolina yogurt cake, and we've got a rockpool date tart. Thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you, that's beautiful. You too. Cheers.
See ya. Bye.
Thanks.
People have become so disassociated from food production that during the pandemic, for many people, it was the first time that they thought about the fact that their food is grown in fields and harvested by people and then taken on a truck that's driven by another person that is then put on shelves by another person. All of those different systems were disrupted.
It's really good to be more conscious and more aware of your food, where your food comes from, more aware of what the supply chains are. Where is this thing coming from?
This is Will. He's the head chef at Atesh. He's been designing his menus based around locally available produce for years.
I think the pandemic has shown us that how important it is to have and use local producers, and the fact that the trucks have stopped and there's been like a definite delay in produce from Victoria or Queensland, because the city markets doesn't just utilise produce from New South Wales.
And that kale from the farm earlier, it's now topping Atesh's focaccia. But it's not just access to fresh produce that's important to Will. It's also all about the flavour.
A great example is like if you buy a bunch of radishes from the supermarket, they're soft, they have no flavour, there's no pepperiness. Whereas, the radishes or the turnips and stuff that we get, they're just full of flavour and they're almost spicy and they're just so crunchy. And because you know that they've just been picked the day before. So I think you really just let the produce speak for itself. Tomatoes are a great example of that.
Rhiannon is the manager at Atesh and is passionate about also incorporating local produce into the bar.
Recently, kaffir limes have been in season, so we made a kaffir lime gin. We also do dried citrus, so a lot of our citrus will come from Littleton stores.
The citrus she's talking about comes from here. It's a cooperative that stocks local organic produce, as well as growing its own in its backyard garden. Jacinta runs the place and is passionate about making change within the local community.
Our aim is really to kind of connect people in our community to each other, to the earth, to our food system.
Here you'll find organic produce from a range of local growers, including Farm It Forward, as well as other farms like Epicurean Harvest based in Hartley.
There's so much joy that comes from being just so actively engaged in your community, with your food system, learning, teaching each other.
On another one of their plots, Hannah and Matt are harvesting Farm It Forward produce, ready to deliver to local businesses, including Littleton stores. Once it's arrived at Littleton, the produce is packed into boxes, with other organic produce, and delivered straight to the doors of locals. People order the boxes in advance. They don't choose what the boxes contain, but instead receive an abundance of whatever is seasonally available. However, this local delivery system is uncommon. Our global food systems and demand for food, regardless of its seasonability, see significant food miles added to what we're buying from our supermarkets.
It's kind of an insanity that we need to really see what's going on there and break out of that model.
Jacinda hopes one day to write a book about what a truly local food system looks like and help steer us away from current practices, which see global food systems make up 35% of global greenhouse gas emissions.
If I was to imagine what a local food system in the Blue Mountains, a healthy, resilient and regenerative local food system in the Blue Mountains would look like, I would say that there would be a mix of smaller animals, probably not so much kangaroo, but we might have wallaby or possum. We might have not so much beef, but we might have chicken. I imagine that there would be some Indigenous food that would be a really, really amazing thing to learn about.
In fact, turning to the knowledge of Indigenous Australians could see our national parks transformed into farms, and our farms transformed into national parks, provided that these conversations are in fact led by First Nations people, which is exactly what organisations like Black Duck Foods are aiming to achieve.
Warramie and Garni from Gadigal country to start with. And Wada Yuni Wajanran. So greetings to men, women and everyone in Yuin language. Black Duck Foods is all about resurrecting the truth in the Australian food system in a lot of ways, and ensuring in that truth that First Nations people benefit economically. First Nations people probably participate at about 1% of the revenue out of the traditional food sector. So that's fairly disproportionate when you think about it. It's their story, their country, their language, yet it's been, like too many things, hijacked from First Nations people.
Food has transformed into something that's not just about satiation and nutrient density, but instead it is about exploration. It's about understanding, creating a sense of control and safety. It's about community building, cultural exploration, honoring one's heritage, and then also being an activist, whether it's on climate or human rights issues. There are so many different ways that food culture can help us fulfill those basic human needs.
When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now!
So according to the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, we're told to expect more severe weather events and to expect them more often.
You can't separate food systems from climate change, and a lack of government action has seen people around the world come together to stand up to protect the climate. And while the modern-day youth environmental movement is led by well-known activists such as Greta Thunberg, everyone marching here is ultimately a disciple of Rachel Carson, the woman who helped start the environmental movement with her book Silent Spring. Published in 1962, it's never been out of print.
She was a marine biologist and then she became a soil biologist, and she says something that's really true, and that is nothing in nature exists alone. Nothing. You can't think of, if you think of any natural system, nothing is living in isolation. There's interconnectedness everywhere, and that includes humans. Humans are part of this.
Native grains come from perennial grasses, native perennial grasses. These are deep-rooted grass systems that plough carbon back into the soil. And these are food systems where you don't kill the soil to grow the food. They are thriving. And the benefit of that is when we go down and look at, these food systems, we're looking at a system that doesn't have agriculture and environment competing against each other. They are the same place. We will get over these sorts of bifurcation where we try to split something, and we'll get back on the country and enjoy just what it's there for, what's its function, what's its utility, and it's a lot of that supporting people. And we'll get back into eating foods that are a bit more seasonal, but a bit more flavoursome. And those flavours will reflect the climates, the flavours will reflect the seasons, the flavours will reflect the country.
Many of our current large-scale agricultural systems are not resilient. They really, really rely on a lot of fossil fuel. They rely on a lot of transportation. We've had a little taster with COVID on how precarious this is. As soon as supply chains get broken, how are you going to get all that food here from way out there? How are we going to transport all that? What if petrol prices go ridiculously through the roof? How are we going to get all that food from that far away to here? So localism is really an answer to how we're going to get past a lot of climatic changes in the future. And we've got to build resilience, and we've got to build community resilience, local resilience.
And you don't have to live in a place like the Blue Mountains to connect to your food system.
There are so many different ways of getting in touch with your food system. So from going to farmers markets to growing things in your house or apartment. Just that interest, reading books, learning about the food system.
In many ways, this might be the beginning of a reshaping of our relationship to food, to agriculture. And I'm hoping that this is just kind of the very start of a more sustainable food system, of people learning to cook new things, building new skill sets in the kitchen and outside. And hopefully they're going to start connecting the dots between climate and food and realizing that we really do, as individuals, have a lot of power.